For the average ski vacationer, common wisdom would imply that the further north you get, the better the skiing. Yet at the same latitude at which Northeast skiers and riders can find the iconic resorts of Vermont, another state often gets overlooked: New Hampshire. On paper, New Hampshire is abound with some of the tallest and most aesthetic ski resorts in the Northeast region. But when it comes to booking a major Northeast ski trip, many folks completely overlook the state and instead go to neighboring Vermont or Maine. So why do so few people seriously consider New Hampshire as a regional ski destination? And have we all just been getting it wrong this whole time? Well, in this video, we'll go through the strengths and weaknesses of skiing and riding in what's perhaps the most interesting case study of any Northeast ski state. Let's head up to the Granite State and jump right in. First off, let's start with what should, on paper, make New Hampshire a very appealing state for winter sports. The state's first major advantage is its demography. Many of New Hampshire's ski resorts sit within easy day trip distance of the Boston metro area, making areas in southern New Hampshire such as Mount Sunapee and Gunstock particularly appealing in terms of convenience alone. In addition, New Hampshire boasts a local population more than twice the size of Vermont to the west and concentrated into just under 4 times less area than Maine to the east. But it's not just the population that New Hampshire has going for it. The state's natural geography makes for some of the most incredible mountains in New England. New Hampshire is actually home to the tallest and most geographically prominent mountain in all of the Northeast, Mount Washington, which tops out at a whopping 6,288 feet. At least 20 other mountains in the state are taller than the tallest mountain in Vermont, which is Mount Mansfield, and at least 4 are taller than the tallest mountain in Maine, which is Mount Katahdin. Thanks in part to this favorable geography, the state features a number of ski areas that are competitive, if not top of their category, in vertical drop. Wildcat, Loon, and Cannon Mountains all stand at or above 2,000 feet of skiable vertical, all of which are very respectable totals for the East Coast. Wildcat and Cannon even see their summits sitting at over 4,000 feet of elevation, making them some of the highest lift-served peaks in the region and offering spectacular views from the top. The rugged nature of New Hampshire's alpine terrain makes for some seriously technical terrain, and many resorts, especially in the north-central part of the state, hold their own against the best in New England for on-slope challenges. And finally, New Hampshire's ski resorts also typically see temperatures that are just as cold as Vermont's and colder than the resorts in southern New York, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, leading to more reliable snowmaking operations and better natural snow preservation than other parts of the region. But in order to have a truly competitive ski resort, you need natural snow, and that's where New Hampshire starts to fall short. Almost all resorts in New Hampshire, including its highest and most northern peaks, fall well short of even 200 inches of snowfall in an average year. This puts the best of New Hampshire in line with typical resorts in southern Vermont, even though most of them are further north. Even the snowiest resorts in north-central New Hampshire, such as Wildcat, Cannon, and Bretton Woods, average 25% less natural snow than northern Vermont peaks such as Stowe and Smuggler's Notch, and are seriously outclassed by Jay Peak, Vermont's snowiest mountain, which often sees accumulation totals close to double these New Hampshire resorts. While New Hampshire ski resorts may not offer the highest snow totals, they stand out even less when it comes to the sizes of their skiable footprints. While several New Hampshire ski resorts offer commendable vertical drops, even the best resorts in New Hampshire only max out at around 400 or so acres. As a result, even the state's most competitive offerings are smaller than several well-traveled Vermont ski areas, such as Stowe, Sugarbush, Okemo, and Stratton. New Hampshire's resorts are plainly dwarfed by Vermont's biggest resort, Killington, which is 3 times larger than the biggest New Hampshire ski resort, Bretton Woods. And while New Hampshire's best resorts do see pretty comparable snow totals to the best mountains in Maine, its easterly neighbor, Pine Tree State resorts such as Sugarloaf and Sunday River attract more overnighters thanks to their sheer size, boasting footprints that are second and third largest in the Northeast, respectively. And on the note of terrain size, the actual skiable footprint of New Hampshire's biggest resorts often falls short of the destinations in both Vermont and Maine, even in cases when the boundary-to-boundary acreage seems similar, for one key reason: the tree coverage. At several competitive ski areas in Maine, Vermont, and even eastern Canada's Quebec, a significant portion of the resort footprint is skiable as unmarked glades, with naturally spaced trees enabling many unofficial zones to remain skiable throughout a course season. While New Hampshire does have its fair share of thinned-out official glade runs, These zones often see unreliable openings due to low snow coverage, and outside of the cut and maintained glades, wooded zones can be far too dense to be skiable in a typical season. The trees in southern New Hampshire ski resorts are a bit more widely spaced than those in the north central part of the state, but the resorts in the state's lower third just do not see the natural snow to practically offer woods terrain on a regular basis. This means that for most advanced and expert visitors, you simply won't be finding the hidden powder stashes for days after a storm in New Hampshire that can be found if you know what you're doing elsewhere in the New England region. Unfortunately, another New Hampshire downside is that none of its ski resorts take full advantage of the state's tallest and most prominent mountains. With its highest ski areas topping out just above 4,000 feet, the resorts do not even come close to reaching the peaks that New Hampshire has to offer. In fact, even though its tallest peak is nearly 2,000 feet lower than New Hampshire's, Vermont's tallest ski resort, Killington, actually summits over 150 feet higher than New Hampshire's tallest resorts, Cannon and Wildcat. Elevation and vertical descent are still relative strengths for New Hampshire's best mountains, but they're not one-of-a-kind distinguishers, and it's clear that resort developers have not taken as much advantage of the state's natural mountain ranges as they theoretically could. So if New Hampshire ski resorts can't compete in size, both officially and unofficially, why not simply expand, especially given the state's favorable on-paper topography? Unfortunately, expansion in the Northeast is often not so simple, and an overwhelming barrage of factors make expansion of most New Hampshire ski resorts practically impossible. The primary factor preventing many New Hampshire ski areas from expanding is that many are located in state park or forest land, making permits difficult or impossible to get. Several ski areas exist near or within delicate alpine ecosystems, making for potential environmental consequences in the event an expansion is approved. In addition, due to southern New Hampshire's much denser base of population, resorts that aren't inhibited by these forest land restrictions have found themselves surrounded by private development, making it very economically difficult to expand. But even ignoring environmental concerns, many of the tempting peaks in New Hampshire have simply not been economically feasible to develop. The terrain in northern New Hampshire might look really good for ski resorts on paper, but the northern third of the state is just too remote to practically allow for travel. In addition to the prolonged driving distance and lack of infrastructure, a similarly long commute to the tip of New Hampshire would bring you to snowier resorts in northern Vermont, and likely with less sketchy roads. But New Hampshire's tallest and most prominent mountains aren't actually in the incredible rural tip of the state. Rather, they exist in the Presidential and Franconia ranges in the north central part of the state, which actually offers fairly decent roads and infrastructure. In fact, every New Hampshire mountain that tops out above 5,000 feet exists within one of these two ranges, and alpine enthusiasts who like to earn their turns have very much caught wind of this, with these ranges becoming incredibly popular for backcountry skiing and riding. So why haven't some of New Hampshire's most famous skiable backcountry locations, most notably Tuckerman Ravine on the massive Mount Washington, been developed into ski resorts? You've probably seen pictures of these mountains, which offer some of the only above treeline slopes in New England and make for absolutely stunning alpine environments. Unfortunately, the topography that makes these mountains so unique also makes them plainly inhospitable to ski resort development. The Presidential Range sees uniquely challenging weather conditions not just for the Northeast, but for all of North America. Mount Washington regularly sees record wind speeds that would make lift service impossible on many days, even holding the title for the highest surface wind speed ever recorded in the Northern Hemisphere at a whopping 231 miles an hour. In addition, Tuckerman Ravine, as well as many other backcountry zones in or around Mount Washington, are simply too steep and demanding for practical resort development, with lackluster potential beginner and intermediate terrain. And despite much stronger snow totals on these peaks than New Hampshire's officially developed resorts, the highly exposed terrain zones result in wind-scoured slopes in extremely hard-packed conditions. In fact, these are key reasons why many backcountry enthusiasts do not even touch Tuckerman's Ravine during the core winter season and wait until late March, April, or even May to scale the face. So, has anyone actually tried to build a ski resort on one of the 5,000 footers in the Presidential or Franconia ranges or in the relatively undeveloped northern White Mountains? Well, while no documented developments have taken place on the 5,000 footers, there has actually been activity in the northern White Mountains. For years, plans have been in place for a massive ski area development known as the Balsams in northern Coos County. This development, if completed, expects to provide 2,200 acres of skiable terrain, making it the largest resort by skiable acreage on the entire East Coast. The location of this proposed resort also sits in a region which gets snow totals closer to that of northern Vermont, allowing the balsams to compete with the likes of Stowe and Jay Peak for those chasing the best conditions. This all being said, for this massive plan to come to fruition, the balsams would need to overcome some major challenges, most of which stem from its isolation. The resort is almost 4 hours from the Boston metro area, putting it in direct competition with, if not a step below, the resorts of northern and central Vermont for those commuting from that area. In addition, housing all the staff needed to run the resort will create a major infrastructure challenge, with the small nearby town of Colebrook not currently having the development needed to host such a workforce. That said, if the investment money is there to develop the needed infrastructure, this project could be the economic jumpstart the region needs, and the one that puts New Hampshire skiing and riding back on the radar. So far, we've talked about New Hampshire ski resorts as they relate to the distance from the city of Boston. However, this convenience does not necessarily hold true for residents of other metropolitan areas. For anyone coming from New York, Montreal, or the Mid-Atlantic, New Hampshire's best ski areas are actually quite the trip compared to far more competitive resorts in Vermont, New York, and in some cases, even Quebec. And, even for those located in Boston, many of the most appealing ski destinations in the state are found far enough to the north that the drive time can push what can reasonably be considered a day trip for most visitors. In the 2 to 3 hour drive time it would take for most Boston-based skiers and riders to travel to Loon, Cannon, or Wildcat without traffic, the same visitors could make it to larger resorts in southern Vermont, such as Mount Snow and Stratton, and within 3 to 4 hours could arrive at some of the best resorts in the east with Stowe, Killington, or Jay Peak. When most people think of the quintessential small-town New England ski village, they're probably picturing the iconic ski towns of Vermont. In some ways, this is where the lower population density of Vermont has worked in its favor. In Vermont, many towns grew to support the demand generated by the otherwise quite remote ski resorts in the 20th century when the sport was new. These towns were purpose-built to support the lodging and food capacity needed to accommodate those making the trip to these ski areas, and, as a result, they have a distinct charm and character all their own, one which makes them highly appealing for those looking for the full ski vacation experience. Many of New Hampshire's ski areas are quite detached from the state's bigger population centers, lacking in both the infrastructure and the character to draw in those looking for a comprehensive skiing or riding experience. Many Vermont and Quebec resorts also boast more expansive lodging and food options than are available near many of the more remote north-central New Hampshire resorts, making weekend trips a far more feasible option. While on-mountain accommodations exist at some of New Hampshire's ski resorts, in general, they fall well short of the options that can be found at many Vermont competitors. Small-scale motels and condos exist near the base areas or even slopeside at many New Hampshire areas, but nowhere in the state can you find anything even close to the luxury of Spruce Village in Stowe or the charm of the Mad River Valley near Sugarbush and Mad River Glen. Frankly, New Hampshire just doesn't have the same kind of dedicated ski towns that exist across Vermont. Instead, for most visitors, skiing in New Hampshire takes the character of a there-and-back day trip, not necessarily from Boston, but potentially from further away accommodations in larger towns such as North Conway. As a result, New Hampshire is an unappealing destination for those looking to book a multi-day ski vacation, especially those looking for the idyllic character of a ski town in Vermont. So New Hampshire is a state with a rich ski history and unique terrain, and it's worth seeking out for any dedicated skier or rider in the Northeast who's looking for a taste of everything the region has to offer. However, due to its relatively low snow totals, modest skiable acreage numbers, and comparative lack of on-mountain infrastructure and accommodations, New Hampshire struggles to compete for the top tier of Northeast clientele with Vermont and other states in the region. If you're traveling from the Boston metro area, you're an adventurous backcountry skier, or you just want to experience the unique topography of resorts such as Cannon, Wildcat, or Bretton Woods, then maybe a trip to New Hampshire this ski season is right for you. But if you don't fall under any of those categories, you're probably still better off going to Vermont. Speaking of Vermont, if you're on the East Coast and looking for the weekend ski trip of a lifetime, we're incredibly excited to share that we've got you covered. Join our team and other like-minded enthusiasts on a ski trip to Vermont's Sugarbush Resort, which is home to not just some of the most beautiful and diverse terrain in the East, but also some of the most challenging steeps in the entire country. And because we want this to be the best ski weekend you've ever been on, this isn't just some ordinary ski trip. We've rented out an entire hostel, coordinated transportation from New York City and Boston, and arranged to have meals cooked in-house throughout the trip. Oh, did we mention there's a bar inside the accommodation? And the best part, this trip is an absolute steal, with early bird pricing of just $350 through November 1st. It's not every day you get to go on an all-inclusive ski trip for that price without having to plan literally anything. Spots are filling up quick, so if you want to put down a deposit and see the full itinerary, check out the link in the description below. For more information on New Hampshire and over 100 ski resorts around the world, check out peakrankings.com. See you for the next one.